The alarms were a scream in a dead language. Reed Vance was fighting a battle he had already lost, his hands a blur over the engineering console. The Vagabond was a good ship, a freighter built for hauling scrap, not for dodging planetary defense cannons. Sparks rained down from a compromised conduit, sizzling on the blue-green ice of the planet filling his main viewport. Hull integrity at 12%, the ship's automated voice announced, calm as a funeral director. Yeah, I got that, Reed muttered, wrenching a stabilizer lever that refused to budge. He was a scavenger, an engineer. He fixed things that were broken. But this was annihilation. His freighter, shot down by a patrol he had not even seen, was now a 100,000-ton bullet aimed at the heart of Cytherian 7. The world rushed up to meet him. It was a place of breathtaking, sterile beauty. A crystal knife, blue glaciers the size of continents, mountains of jagged obsidian, and a sky the color of a faint, toxic violet. Two suns, pale and weak, offered light but no warmth. The impact was not a crash, it was a cessation of existence. Metal tore, screamed, and then fell silent. Reed hung in his straps, the cabin dark, the only sound the high-pitched tink-tink-tink of freezing metal and the hiss of his oxygen mask. The cold was instantaneous. It was not a temperature, it was a presence. It seeped through the fractured hull, a predator smelling blood. He was alive. Scrap. That's all he was now. Scrap on a ball of ice. He unclipped his harness and fell 3 feet to a bulkhead that was now the floor. His survival kit, his heavy thermal pack, all gone, ripped out into the blizzard that was already consuming the wreckage. He salvaged what he could, a multi-tool, a single protein wafer, and his data slate. He kicked open the emergency hatch. The air hit him like a physical blow. It was thin, sharp, and tasted of ozone. He pulled his mask tighter, the small rebreather unit struggling to warm the atmosphere. He stood on the edge of his ruined life for less than a minute before they came. They emerged from the driving snow like ghosts. 7 feet tall and clad in armor that looked less like metal and more like faceted, weaponized ice. They carried thermal lances that hissed in the cold. Their language was a series of sharp, guttural clicks and pops. Reed did not bother to raise his hands. He was an engineer, not a soldier. He just stared, his breath pluming inside his mask. They seized him. Their gloved hands were brutal, efficient. They dragged him from the wreck and into the storm, his boots skidding over the permafrost. The journey was a blur of white and pain. They were moving toward a structure he had not seen from the air, a dark spire that seemed to have been carved from a single massive glacier. Massive. They hauled him through blast doors that sealed with a pneumatic sigh, cutting off the howl of the wind. The interior was not a palace, but a military command center. Blue light panels glowed from the walls, casting sterile light on polished stone floors. The soldiers, his escorts, parted. They forced him to his knees. He looked up, and for the first time, the cold inside his suit felt warmer than the room. She sat on a raised dais, not a throne, but a simple block of black, reflective stone. She was not in armor like her guards. She wore intricate layers of white fur and silver-blue silks that seemed too delicate for this world, yet she wore them like a uniform. Her skin had a faint, pearlescent blue tint, and her hair was the color of snow, but it was her eyes that held him. They were violet, not purple, not lavender, but the deep, unsettling violet of a dying star. This was Princess Thaleria. She looked at him, and a slow, cruel smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of malice, but of profound, unassailable superiority. "This is the creature?" Her voice was low, melodic, and she spoke perfect Commonwealth standard. It was the voice of someone who had learned the language of lesser beings to give commands, not to hold conversations. She rose, descending the dais with a liquid, predatory grace. She stopped inches from him. He could smell her, a strange, clean scent, like ozone and cold rock. "This is what shot down my sky guard," she mused, circling him. "I expected a warrior, a soldier from the Outer Rim syndicates. You are just soft." Her gloved finger traced the edge of his jaw, just below his mask. "Look at this," she said to her guards, though her eyes never left his. Soft skin, covered in fabricated warmth, a slave to its own biology. She tapped his rebreather pack. "And this, it needs processed air. It cannot even breathe my world." Reed's jaw tightened. He had been captured by pirates, held by warlords, and threatened by corporate enforcers. He was not intimidated by a woman in a dress, no matter how cold the room. "This creature has a name," he said, his voice rough. Thaleria's smile widened. "I am sure it does. A dog has a name. It is still a dog. You are a stray human, and on Cytherian 7, we do not keep strays." "Then kill me," Reed shot back. "Stop wasting my time." One of the guards slammed the butt of his lance into Reed's spine. Reed grunted, collapsing forward, but he caught himself, pushing back up. He met her gaze. She laughed. It was a sharp, surprising sound, like ice cracking. "Kill you? That is too fast. A waste of an opportunity." She knelt in front of him, bringing their faces level. Her violet eyes were analytical, dissecting him. "You have the fire of a scavenger, the arrogance. You think you are a survivor because you have endured the tame, warm poisons of the galaxy." She gestured to the armored viewport behind her. "My world is pure. It kills weakness. You, human, would not survive a single night in the open wilds." Reed stared at her. The air between them was electric. "Is that a fact?" he asked quietly. "It is a truth," she said. "The sun set. The true cold comes and your soft skin would freeze. Your weak blood would turn to sludge. Your lungs would collapse. You would be a statue of your own failure by morning." A new light entered her eyes, a flicker of bored, aristocratic amusement. She was looking for a new game, and he had just landed on her board. "I will make you a wager, human," Thaleria said, standing. "I am not in a position to bet," Reed said, rolling his shoulders, trying to ease the sting in his back. "Oh, but you are. You are betting your life, and you did not even know it." She began to pace. "The glacier expanse, it begins 3 clicks north of this outpost, nothing but ice, wind, and the dark." She turned back to him, the cruel smile firmly in place. "Survive one night, from the setting of the twin suns to the rise of the first. Survive, and you are interesting, an asset. You will fall under my protection, granted status by royal law, a fascinating pet. And if I fail, then the ice will take what I do not want. My world will cleanse you and I will have my answer. It is a simple test." Silence held the room. The guards were statues. Reed looked at the floor, then back at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his own face, and he let out a short, sharp laugh. The laugh startled her. Her expression faltered for a fraction of a second. "One night," Reed said, pushing himself up to his feet. The guards tensed, but Thaleria raised a hand, stopping them. "That is your big test? One night of cold? You find this amusing?" "I find you amusing, princess," Reed said. He was an engineer. He knew thermodynamics. He knew survival. He could build a shelter, find a way. This arrogant royal thought her planet was special. It was just physics. "I am proud," he said. "I am also not a fool. but I am tired of being on my knees." He reached up and unclipped the heavy, life-saving thermal vest he wore over his undersuit. He dropped it to the floor. "If I am going to prove a point, I will do it right." He unsealed his rebreather mask. He pulled it off. The air was a razor. It sliced into his lungs, which immediately tried to seize. It felt like swallowing needles. He gasped, his eyes watering, but he forced himself to stand straight. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him double over. "You are a fool," Thaleria whispered, her amusement replaced by a flicker of something else. Disgust? Interest? "No gear," Reed choked out, the words painful. "Just me. I accept your game." Thaleria stared at him for a long, heavy moment. She looked at the gear on the floor, then at his face, pale and already turning blue at the lips. "So be it," she said, her voice flat. "Take him to the border of the expanse and leave him. His pride can keep him warm." The walk was the longest 3 kilometers of his life. The guards did not drag him this time. They marched behind him, their lances humming, forcing him on. He was in his thin, black undersuit, armed with nothing but his multi-tool and his own stupid arrogance. The outpost doors sealed behind him. He was alone. The twin suns, weak and distant, were already touching the jagged horizon, painting the ice in shades of blood orange and deep purple. The beauty was a lie. The moment the suns dipped below the world's edge, the temperature did not drop, it plummeted. The wind picked up, a high-pitched, screaming howl that carried tiny, razor-sharp shards of ice. Reed ran. He was not running from anything, but for something. Shelter. He was an engineer. He analyzed. The wind was coming from the west. He needed a leeward wall. He found a ravine, a deep cut in the permafrost. He slid down the embankment, the ice tearing at his suit and his hands. He was shivering violently now, his body's desperate, failing attempt to generate heat. His lungs felt like they were full of slush. "Stupid, stupid, proud, idiot," he chattered to himself. He found a small overhang, more a crack in the ice wall than a cave. He crawled inside, pulling his knees to his chest, trying to make himself small. The wind howled past the opening. He would survive. He just had to make it 8 hours. 8 hours of misery. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, trying to slow his heart, trying to think his blood into moving. He was not going to die for her amusement. He must have drifted into a hypothermic stupor, because the first sound did not register. The second one did. It was a vibration, deep in the ice, traveling up his spine. It was not the wind. He opened his eyes. The world was lit by the faint, eerie glow of Cytherean's 2 moons. He heard it again, a thump, then a grind. It was the sound of something impossibly heavy, walking. He crawled to the mouth of his small cave and looked out. The ravine was long and wide, and he was no longer alone in it. It was 200 yards away, moving with a terrifying, fluid purpose. It was not a creature of flesh. It was a machine, but it moved like an animal. It was sleek, black, and segmented, like an enormous metallic insect. It had 6 legs, each ending in a point like an obsidian knife, and they punched into the ice with terrifying force. A single dull red optical sensor pulsed on what Reed assumed was its front. It was hunting. Reed's blood, which had felt like sludge, suddenly turned to fire. Adrenaline surged, a blessed, burning warmth. This was not the cold. This was something else. He was an engineer. He knew tech. This was old. This was military. This was a war machine. It stopped. The red eye swiveled, scanning the ravine. It had not seen him. It was tracking him. His heat signature, his smell. It turned, its metal body clicking and whirring, and began to move directly toward his hiding spot. Reed scrambled backward, out of the small cave, and began to run. He was not a fighter. He was smart. He ran low, using the terrain. He burst from the ravine, back onto the open expanse. The predator was faster. It exploded from the ravine, its 6 legs churning, throwing up huge sprays of ice. It was gaining. Reed dodged, weaving between massive pillars of blue ice. He could hear it behind him, the rhythmic, terrible thump crunch of its legs. He slid, using the ice to his advantage. But the machine was built for this. Its knife-like feet gave it perfect traction. It was toying with him. It was hurting him. He was forced into a small, dead-end canyon. He spun, his back hitting a solid wall of ice. Trapped. The biomech predator stopped. 20 yards away. It tilted its head, the red eye pulsing slowly. Thermal vents on its back hissed, releasing plumes of steam into the night air. It was a grave stalker, a relic of the forgotten wars, a biomechanical hunter bred to track and kill. It reared up on its back 4 legs, its front 2 armed with energized claws slicing the air. This is how it ended, not by the cold but by a ghost in the machine. He closed his eyes. A sound split the night, a deep, resonant thump, a flash of orange-red light. Reed opened his eyes. The predator screeched. The sound was not organic. It was the shriek of tortured metal and overloaded circuits. A molten hole, glowing bright, had appeared in its central chassis. It stumbled, its legs buckling. Reed looked up. On the ridge above him, silhouetted against the moons, was a figure, sleek, armored, and holding a smoking heavy rifle. Thaleria. She was in full environmental armor, white and blue, designed for combat. She leaped from the ridge, landing lightly on the ice, her movements impossibly graceful. The gravestalker was trying to right itself, its legs flailing. Thaleria stalked toward it, her face obscured by a polarized visor. She raised the thermal spear, placed the muzzle against the machine's red eye, and fired again. The thump was final. The machine collapsed, silent. She stood there for a moment, the weapon smoking. Then she turned to Reed. He was on the ground, leaning against the ice wall, his chest heaving, not from exertion but from the thin, frozen air. Thaleria retracted her visor with a hiss. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "You almost proved me wrong," she said. But her voice was not steady. It trembled, just slightly. It was the first flaw he had ever seen. That thing," he gasped. "An old war drone," she snapped, her composure returning. "We thought we'd deactivated them all. It must have sensed your ship's energy signature, or your heat." She looked him over. What little there is. The adrenaline was gone. The cold came back, 1,000 times worse. His body's last reserves were spent. He began to shake, a deep, uncontrolled convulsion that started in his bones. "Get up, human," she commanded. "I cannot." She cursed, a sharp, alien word, and stalked over to him. She grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. He was a dead weight. She was impossibly strong. "You are not dying here," she hissed, half dragging, half carrying him. "Where?" "Hunting shelter, close." She hauled him over the ridge. A small, prefabricated dome was set into the ice, perfectly camouflaged. She hit a panel. A door slid open. She shoved him inside. The world went silent. The door sealed, and the maddening, screaming howl of the wind was gone. The shelter was dark, and just as cold as the outside. A single, weak light panel hummed on, casting a faint blue glow. My gear." Reed chattered. His teeth were knocking together so hard he thought they would break. "Your gear is useless. You are in deep hypothermia. Your core is shutting down." He saw her moving in the dim light. She was pulling at his frozen undersuit. The fabric was stiff, brittle. I, I can. You can die, she said. He heard the shing of a knife. She was cutting the suit from him. The blade was sharp, her movements efficient, impersonal. She was field dressing him like an animal. The suit fell away. He was bare-chested, exposed to the air. He collapsed onto the shelter's floor. A series of hisses. She was unsealing her own armor. The heavy white plates fell away, revealing a thin black thermal layer beneath. "What are you doing?" he managed. "Cytherian protocol," she said, her voice flat. "When the heater fails, the body provides." She knelt, grabbed him, and pulled him against her. It was a shock. His skin was ice. Her body, even through the thin suit, was a furnace. Cytherians ran at a higher core temperature, a biological adaptation to their world. It was not gentle. It was a pragmatic, desperate act of survival. She pulled him tight, wrapping her arms and legs around him, maximizing contact, forcing her life-giving heat into his dying core. They lay pressed together on the cold floor, hostile, shivering. He was trapped. He was being held by the woman who had tried to kill him, and she was the only thing keeping him alive. His shivering was so violent it shook them both. "Stop fighting it," she ordered, her voice a low murmur against his ear. He tried to relax, to let the heat in. He was pressed against her chest, his head tucked under her chin. He could smell the ozone and cold stone on her skin. He could feel the strong, steady beat of her heart, a counter-rhythm to his own frantic, failing pulse. His gaze was level with her throat. His eyes drifted up. Her violet eyes were inches from his, wide open in the dark, staring at the ceiling. "You shiver like a dying engine," she murmured. Her breath was warm on his cheek. "And you're warm," he managed, his teeth chattering. His shivering began to ease, replaced by a dull ache. His body was starting to fight back. He was alive. The moment hung in the blue-lit silence. It was not sexual. It was something far more raw. It was pure, physical, a shared space of survival. His gaze dropped to her lips. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and they were nearly touching his. He felt her body tense. Her eyes, which had been distant, snapped down to his. They narrowed. A sharp, sudden beep, beep, beep shattered the intimacy. A blue icon flashed in the air, projected from a comm unit on her wrist. Instantly, she shoved him away. The loss of heat was a physical blow. Reed gasped, curling into himself on the floor. Thaleria was already on her feet, the comm active. A tinny, urgent voice filled the shelter, speaking in the harsh, clicking Cytherian language. She listened, her face turning from a mask of complicated tension to one of solid, cold marble. She snapped a single-word reply. The projection vanished. She turned, not to him, but to her armor, already sealing the plates back into place. "What is it?" Reed asked. He grabbed a discarded fur lining from a bench and wrapped it around his bare shoulders. Thaleria paused at the door. The cruel smile was back, but it was brittle now, stretched thin. "My father, the king, requests my presence at the palace." She looked back at him, her gaze sweeping over his weakened, half-naked form. "There has been an assassination attempt. It seems my night is just beginning." She hit the panel. The door hissed open, revealing the swirling pale blue night. "Yours," she said without a trace of irony, "is over." She stepped out into the storm and was gone. The royal spire of Cytherian was not a building. It was a blade of black ice and obsidian, puncturing the violet sky. Thaleria's personal flyer cut through the air, silent as a falling snowflake, landing on a platform swept by winds that would flash freeze exposed water. She stepped out, her combat armor already dismissed, replaced by the formal, restrictive silks of her station. The cold on her face was a familiar lover, but today, it felt different. It felt like a cage. Inside, the palace was not warm. It was engineered to be a few degrees above freezing, a temperature the Cytherian elite found comfortable and invigorating. To any other species, it would be a torture chamber. Servants with the same pale blue skin and violet eyes as their princess bowed as she passed, their movements precise and silent. She walked through halls of polished ice, past tapestries woven from metallic fibers depicting the glorious slaughters of her ancestors. She found her father, King Theron, in the strategy chamber. He was a mountain of a man, his white hair braided with silver, his eyes the same deep violet as hers, but without a trace of light. He stood before a holographic map of the planet, red icons flashing over the borderlands. "You are late," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The border was active," Thaleria said, her voice clipped, devoid of emotion. "A war drone was awakened, I dealt with it, and the off-worlder, the human—" Her father turned. His gaze was an assessment, cold and sharp. "The assassination attempt failed. The toxin was crude. I am pleased for your health, father." "Are you?" He smiled, a thin, hard expression. "It changes nothing. In fact, it accelerates our timeline. The Outer Lords are restless. They see the attack as a sign of weakness. They believe my bloodline is failing." "My bloodline," Thaleria corrected, her voice dropping. "Ours?" He made a gesture, and the map was replaced by the image of a man. He was Cytherian, but of a different caste. His features were sharper, his eyes a paler, icy blue. He was handsome, in a way that suggested cruelty. "Lord Jarrow of the Fifth House." Thaleria felt her stomach clench, a knot of ice and bile. "Jarrow. He controls the southern ice fields," Theron said, "and the orbital shipyards. He is ambitious, which makes him dangerous. But his ambition, if bound to us, makes him a weapon. You want me to marry him?" It was not a question. "I want to solidify this planet," her father countered. "Jarrow has agreed. The union will merge the two strongest bloodlines. It will silence the Outer Lords. The Ice Gala, in 2 days, will serve as the betrothal announcement." "He is a brute," Thaleria said, the first crack in her frozen composure. "He skins his enemies and displays them at his gates." "He is a traditionalist," Theron corrected. "And you are a princess. You were bred for this. For war. For politics. This is both. You will do your duty. The human provided you a distraction. Now that is over." "Yes, father." Her voice was pure ice. She turned and left the chamber, her back straight, her hands fisted in the folds of her silk. Her demeanor was colder than the palace walls. She was a political pawn, a piece in a game, and she had never, not once, been allowed to be anything else. Reed Vance, meanwhile, was not in a dungeon. He was in a room that, to the Cytherians, probably passed for luxury. It was, in fact, diplomatic detainment. The walls were smooth, white polymer, emitting a low-level heat that kept the room at a bracing, but survivable, 10 degrees Celsius. He had been given thermal clothing, standard-issue prisoner's garb, and food that was nutritious, gelatinous, and tasted like cold, metallic regret. He was bored, and a bored engineer is a dangerous thing. The room had a terminal. It was a standard Cytherian interface, a black, glossy panel with no obvious controls. It was meant for comfort, access to climate, nutrition requests, and approved planetary media, which consisted mostly of historical epics about Cytherians winning wars against overwhelming odds. Reed, however, did not see a comfort panel. He saw a locked system. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, his multi-tool in hand. He had palmed it before they'd fully processed him, hiding it in the seam of his boot. He had already spent an hour carefully, methodically, removing the panel's faceplate. He was not a hacker, not in the traditional sense. He was an engineer. He did not break code. He rerouted hardware. He worked for hours, his fingers deft, bypassing security protocols not by fighting them, a waste of time, but by physically bridging the data ports. He was giving himself a new access node, one the system would not recognize as a threat because, as far as the system was concerned, it did not exist. He was in. He attached his own data slate to the jury-rigged connection. The small, cracked screen of his slate lit up, and he began to sift. He was not looking for anything in particular. He was just curious. He was a scavenger. He lived by the motto that one man's trash was his treasure. One planet's locked data stream was his evening entertainment. He found the usual: system architecture, power grids, atmospheric controls. It was all elegantly designed, a closed loop of near-perfect efficiency. But then he found something else. It was a data pattern, hidden beneath the primary communication logs. It was not a message. It was the echo of a message. A burst transmission, sent from a single node deep within the palace, aimed not at any other point on the planet but up, outward. It was encrypted. Not just encrypted. It was layered in codes he had never seen, wrapped in a compression algorithm that was deliberately designed to look like background static, but read new systems. He knew what clean static looked like, and this was dirty. It was purposeful. He ran a diagnostic. The signal's destination was masked, but the trajectory was clear. It was being beamed to a point in empty space, a place where a ship could be waiting in dark mode. Someone on Cytherian 7 was hiding encrypted transmissions, sending them to an off-world military faction. He started to trace the originating node, his fingers flying across his slate. He was so focused, so deep in the data, that he did not hear the pneumatic hiss of his door. He smelled it first. A faint, acrid scent, like bitter almonds and burnt metal. His head snapped up. A Cytherian servant, one of the pale, silent ones, was standing in the doorway, a tray in his hands. On the tray was a single steaming cup. "A warm beverage," the servant said, his voice flat. "By order of the court physician, to aid your human metabolism." Reed's eyes flicked from the servant's face to the cup. The smell was coming from the steam. "I am fine," Reed said, slowly sliding his data slate behind him. "Not thirsty." "You must drink," the servant insisted. He stepped into the room. His eyes were not right. They were too wide. His pupils dilated. He was a fanatic, or terrified, or both. Reed stood up, placing himself between the servant and his makeshift workstation. "I said I am good." The servant's hand twitched. He suddenly lunged, not to offer the cup, but to throw its contents at Reed's face. Reed dodged. He was an engineer, not a brawler, but he had lived on the fringes. He moved. The steaming liquid splashed against the polymer wall, and the material hissed. It sizzled, smoking and discoloring, the polymer melting like wax. The servant dropped the tray and pulled a thin crystal knife from his robes. He lunged again. Reed grabbed the only thing he had, the heavy detached faceplate of the console. He met the attack, blocking the knife, the crystal shattering against the metal. The servant stared at his broken weapon in disbelief. Reed did not hesitate. He drove the heavy plate forward, a blunt force strike to the servant's chest. The Cytherian went down, gasping, the wind knocked out of him. The door, which had been open, slid shut with a definitive, heavy thud. A new figure was in the room, standing by the door controls. Princess Thelyria. She was not in silks. She was in the same black, form-fitting thermal undersuit she had worn in the shelter. She looked at the gasping servant on the floor, at the melted patch on the wall, and then at Reed, who was breathing heavily, the faceplate still in his hand. "This is not," Reed panted, "what I ordered from room service." Thaleria ignored him. She stalked over to the fallen servant, pulled a small silver device from her belt, and pressed it to his neck. There was a faint hiss. The servant went limp, unconscious. She rose, her violet eyes finally settling on him. "You are hard to kill. Human. You keep trying to find out," Reed shot back, tossing the faceplate onto his cot. "Was this you? Decided the ice was too slow?" "If I wanted you dead," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper, "you would be a smear of frozen gas. This was a spy. Someone else's." She nodded at his data slate, half hidden by his pillow. "Someone who clearly does not want you looking at things you should not be." Reed's blood ran cold, colder than the room. "You knew I was in the system." "I have known for an hour," she said. "You are loud. You move through data like a charging Thrax beast." She took a step closer, her eyes scanning his jury-rigged setup. "And you have my ship's logs." "What?" "Do not lie to me," she snapped. "I was not in your room. I was in your ship. What was left of it? I salvaged your logs before the ice crushed the data core." She held up a small crystal chip. "The Vagabond, a registered freighter, but its flight paths. They are interesting. You spent 6 months running supplies in the Siren sector. You docked at resistance outposts." She was inches from him now, her head tilted, analyzing him. "You once worked with the resistance." "I am a scavenger," Reed said, his voice hard. "I haul freight. I do not ask who I am hauling for, as long as the credits are good." "You are a liar," she hissed. "The resistance does not pay in credits. They pay in favors. They pay in ideals, and you reek of them." "And you reek of poison," he shot back, his anger rising. "Your father, your politics, this whole frozen ball of rock. You were going to let me freeze to death for a game." "A game you accepted," she shouted, her cold composure finally breaking. Her face was flushed, a faint, lovely purple. "A game you were losing until I stepped in. You stepped in because your toy was about to be broken by something else. You did not save me. You saved your own amusement. You know nothing about me, human. I know you are a spoiled, arrogant princess who would rather watch a man die than admit she's bored." He had gone too far. Her eyes went dark. She moved so fast he did not even see the attack. It was not a punch. It was a precise, brutal strike, her hand closing on the front of his thermal suit, her other hand on his throat. She slammed him against the wall, lifting him an inch off the floor. Her strength was terrifying. "You," she whispered, her face inches from his, her breath hot, a stark contrast to the cold air, "are soft, weak. You are nothing." The air was crackling. The memory of the shelter, of their bodies pressed together, of his shivering form and her furnace-like heat, was suddenly violently present in the room. He was pinned, helpless, but he was not afraid. He saw the flicker in her violet eyes, the anger, the politics, the poison. It was all a facade. Underneath, she was burning. "Am I?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, not from her grip, but from the sudden suffocating tension. He watched her pupils dilate. He watched her gaze drop from his eyes to his mouth. He did not kiss her. She kissed him. It was not a kiss. It was an invasion. It was a collision. Her lips were not soft. They were demanding, punishing. It was the anger from their argument, the pent-up frustration of her life, the residual raw intimacy of the shelter, all exploding in a single desperate, furious action. His hands, which had been raised in defense, found her waist. He pulled her closer, answering her fury with his own. The kiss deepened, turning from anger to a raw, desperate hunger. It was cold and heat, ice and fire. She made a sound in the back of her throat, a low growl of frustration and need. She broke the kiss, but only to slam him harder against the wall. Her breath was hot on his face. Her eyes were fierce, wild. "You are just a game to me," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. It was a lie. She was trying to convince herself, not him. Reed looked at her, at the woman who held kingdoms and wars in her eyes, at the woman who was a political pawn, at the woman who had shared her heat to save his life and was now trying to pretend it meant nothing. "Then play me harder," he said. The challenge hung in the air. Thaleria's expression shattered. The anger, the passion, it all collapsed into a sudden deep shame. She released him, stumbling back, pulling at the front of her suit as if it were contaminated. This is not," she stammered, turning away from him, her back rigid. Reed watched her, his own heart hammering. He rubbed his throat. "You found the signal," she said, her voice flat, all business, staring at the wall. It took him a second to catch up. "The encrypted burst? Yes, headed off-world." "It is a Jarrow," she said, her voice dead. "Lord Jarrow, the man my father is forcing me to marry." Reed's mind raced. "He is the one who sent the assassin, and the one who tried to kill my father. He is making a power play. He is consolidating. He is signaling an off-world faction, probably mercenaries or a rival corporate state, to let them know the planet is about to be his. He wants to break the blockade." "You have been under blockade?" Reed asked. "For 10 years, she said. "Since the Outer Lords' rebellion, my father holds the planet, but we are cut off from the galaxy." She finally turned back to him. Her face was a mask of cold calculation, the princess back in control. "You worked with the Resistance. You know how to break systems and how to move unseen. I need you to decrypt that data. I need to know who he is talking to." "And what do I get?" Reed asked. "Protection? You just proved your protection means nothing." "You get to live," she said. "And you get to help me stop a monster. You want me to be your spy?" "I want you to be my weapon," she corrected. "Jarrow thinks the Ice Gala is his betrothal party. It is also the only time the entire royal court and all the Outer Lords are in one place. The security protocols will be at maximum, but so will the communications. He will be finalizing his plans." "You want me to go to this gala?" Reed scoffed. "In case you have not noticed, I do not exactly blend." Thaleria looked him up and down, a slow, analytical gaze. A faint, dangerous smile touched her lips. "You will," she said. "You will go as my consort." "Your what?" "My new pet, my human toy." Her smile was cruel, but this time, Reed saw the pain behind it. She was using her own cage as a weapon. "The court expects me to be eccentric, cruel. They expect me to be my father's daughter, a sudden, bizarre attachment to an off-worlder I saved from the ice. It is exactly the kind of arrogant, decadent move they would expect from me. It hides you in plain sight." Reed thought about it. The data, the conspiracy, the woman in front of him. It was insane. It was suicidal. "I will need a better suit," he said. The Ice Gala was a symphony of cold. The grand hall of the royal spire was a massive cavern of natural ice, its ceiling hundreds of feet high, glittering with stalactites that looked like frozen lightning. Blue and violet lights pulsed from within the walls, giving the entire chamber the feel of being inside a massive living gemstone. Cytherian nobles, draped in furs that shimmered with frost and silks that seemed to float, moved with reptilian grace. They drank from delicate crystal flutes, sipping a glowing pale blue liquid that steamed in the cold air. Reed Vance, human engineer, felt ridiculously out of place. He wore alien noble garb. It was not silk, but a dark, fiber-weave suit that was perfectly tailored, insulating, and yet felt as light as air. A high, stiff collar brushed his jaw, and a heavy silver-blue cloak was clasped at his shoulder with a pin shaped like a shard of obsidian. His hair was slicked back. He thought, like a high-priced waiter at a funeral. "Stop fidgeting," Thaleria's voice murmured in his ear. She was beside him, a vision of impossible, cold beauty. She wore a gown that seemed to be made of spun moonlight and diamonds, her snow-white hair piled high, held in place by a crown of jagged black ice crystals. She was the picture of the perfect icy princess, and she was holding his arm. Her grip was tight, proprietary. "This is your blend-in?" Reed muttered, his eyes scanning the crowd. "We are the center of attention." "We are," she agreed, smiling for her audience, a smile that was all teeth. "They are all whispering. The princess and her soft-skinned pet. Did she really pull him from the ice? Let them whisper. They see you as a toy. They do not see you as a threat." But Reed was a threat. Tucked into his ear was a device he had modified, a stolen comm implant that was sifting through the room's high-frequency chatter. And in his glove, a small haptic device was vibrating, feeding him data. He was listening. "The room is flooded with comm signals," he whispered, leaning close, pretending to murmur an endearment. "Everyone is paranoid, but I am getting spikes, coded bursts. Chero? Not him. He is too smart. He is clean. But his people? Not so much." He saw him then. Lord Jarrow. He was holding court near the central ice sculpture, a massive depiction of a Cytherian victory. He was exactly as his image had suggested, tall, arrogant, and cruel. He was laughing, but his pale blue eyes were scanning the room, cold and assessing. Those eyes landed on Thaleria. They moved to Reed, and they narrowed. "He does not like me," Reed said. "He does not like anything that he does not own," Thaleria said, her voice tight. "He is coming over." "Great." Lord Jarrow moved through the crowd, which parted for him like water. He stopped in front of them, his smile predatory. "Princess Thaleria," he boomed, his voice smooth. He took her hand, the one not holding Reed's, and kissed her glove. "You are radiant. This night is a triumph." "Lord Jarrow," Thaleria said, her voice pure ice. "You are kind." Jarrow's gaze shifted to Reed. It was a physical, palpable thing, a look of dismissal, of disgust. "You have brought a curiosity." "I have brought an interest," Thaleria countered, her grip tightening on Reed's arm. "This is Reed. He is, resilient." "So I have heard," Jarrow said, his smile never leaving. "A creature that survived the expanse. Remarkable. One wonders what use you have for it, once the novelty wears off." "One wonders," Thaleria agreed, before Reed could say something that would get them both killed. Thaleria pulled him away. "Come. I want to show my consort the view from the palace balcony." She was pulling him, moving with a fast, desperate energy. "You were right," she whispered, her voice tight. "About what?" "I am getting a massive signal spike. Someone is using a shielded channel, bouncing a signal off the palace comms tower. Right now. They are planning something. Here. Tonight." She shoved open a set of double doors, and they stepped out onto a wide balcony. The wind was a scream. The capital city spread out below them, a glittering expanse of lights under a sky dominated by the twin moons. They were alone. The howl of the wind gave them privacy. They are planning to kill your father, Reed said, his voice flat. He was reading the data from his glove. Not an attempt, a confirmation. The crown will fall before the second moon sets. That is the message. It is being sent right now. Thaleria gripped the ice railing, her knuckles white. He thinks he can take everything in one night. The king, the princess, the throne. She turned to him, her face a mask of fury. He will not have it. She was vibrating with a controlled, terrifying rage. She was beautiful, and she was deadly. This is not a game, human, she whispered, her violet eyes searching his in the pale moonlight. He will kill you without a second thought. You are in my world now, the real one. Do you want to test your limits? The wind whipped her hair around her face. The ice princess, challenging him again. But this time it was not a mockery. It was an invitation. Reed looked at her. He saw the girl who had been bred for politics, the woman forced into a cage, the warrior who had saved his life. He slowly reached out. He did not touch her face. He did not touch her waist. He took her gloved hand, the one gripping the railing, and lifted it. He placed it over his own heart. He leaned in, his voice low. The words meant only for her. A challenge returned. I already am. The music in the grand hall was a low, resonant thrum, a vibration that seemed to come from the ice walls themselves. Reed stood by an obsidian pillar, a ghost in expensive clothing, watching. His stolen ear implant fed him a stream of chaotic, coded chatter. The signal was clean now, focused. He knew the source, Lord Jarrow's personal guard, using a shielded frequency. The vintage is consecrated, a voice murmured, masked by the thrum of the music. The second moon is at its apex, the king's cupbearer is in place, said another. Reed's jaw tightened. They were not waiting. They were doing it now. Across the hall, Thaleria was trapped. She was performing the duty she was bred for, moving with a flawless, cold grace. She was dancing with a succession of political suitors, each one touching her as if she were a relic, a prize to be won. Her smile was perfect, sharp, and utterly fake. Then, Lord Jarrow cut in. He dismissed the previous suitor with a look. The music swelled, and he pulled Thaleria into the center of the floor. His hand was too high on her waist, his grip too possessive. He leaned in, whispering in her ear, his cruel, handsome face exuding confidence. Reed watched her. He saw her spine stiffen. He saw the microscopic, controlled tightening of her lips. She was trapped in the performance of her life. Jarrow's gaze lifted, scanning the crowd, and found Reed. The Lord's eyes were pale, icy, and full of triumphant malice. He smiled, a victor's smile, and then turned his attention back to Thaleria, spinning her in a flourish. The music ended. Thaleria pulled back, her face a mask of royal composure. She did not wait for an escort. She walked, her silver-blue gown shimmering directly toward Reed. The crowd parted for her. She reached him, her face pale, her eyes burning. "My consort is unwell," she announced, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby. "The air is too thin for him." She grabbed Reed's arm, her grip like iron. "We are retiring." She did not wait for a reply. She pulled him from the grand hall, walking with a fast, desperate, yet controlled pace. They moved through the ice corridors, silent as the grave, two armored guards flanking them at a distance. They reached the massive, carved doors of her royal chambers. The guards took up positions outside. The doors hissed shut, sealing them in. The silence was deafening. "He's moving now," Reed said, pulling the implant from his ear. "The king's cupbearer. The vintage. It's poison." "I know," Thaleria snapped. She did not go to a console. She did not try to call for help. She walked to the center of the vast circular room and stopped, her back to him. The chamber was dark, lit only by the faint pulsing light of the city below, visible through a viewport that took up one entire wall. He told me, Jarrow, he told me my father was an old man, and that the planet needed a new, strong hand. She was vibrating, her fists clenched at her sides. He was gloating. He thinks he has already won. He thinks I am his prize for the taking. This is some party, Reed said, his voice low, trying to break the terrible tension. You Cytherians really know how to celebrate. Is regicide always on the agenda? Or just for special occasions? Only when the political alliances are sufficiently weak, she retorted, but the usual venom was gone. Her voice was brittle. She walked to the viewport, a solitary, perfect figure silhouetted against a dying world. He looks at me, she whispered, the words barely audible. They all look at me, like I am a thing, a title, a broodmare, a weapon, a key to the orbital shipyards. He's a bastard, Reed said, moving to stand a few feet behind her. He is my father's choice, she said bitterly. It's all choices, isn't it? None of them mine. I was born for this human, and did you know that? My genes were spliced, my embryonic fluid was adjusted. I was engineered. My body runs warmer to fight the cold. My muscles are denser for combat. My mind was structured for political calculus. She turned, her violet eyes finding his in the dim light. They were not angry. They were, for the first time, empty. I am a perfect machine, she said. I was engineered for control, for strategy, for war, but they never put in the code for love, for want. I do not even know what that means. Reed stared at her. The ice princess, the warrior, the political pawn, laid bare. The woman who had pressed her warm body against his to save his life. You think Earth is so different? He asked. His voice was rough. She raised an eyebrow. You were not engineered. No. We just call it different things. Expectations, duty, grief. We build our own cages, princess. He crossed his arms, leaning against a pillar of ice. You are not the only one in this room who was built to be one thing, and ended up being another. You are a scavenger, a survivor. I am now, he said, and the words were heavy. I used to be a colony engineer. I built things, habitats, atmospheric processors, a different life. He looked away, out the viewport. I had a wife, Alara. We were on Tarsus 9 when the Cathir raids started. It was not a war. It was pest control. They hit the colony from orbit, glassed the main habitat. He could still smell the ozone, the superheated metal. She died, he said, the words flat. She was running for the shelters. I was on the other side of the colony trying to fix a power grid that was failing. I was doing my job. By the time I got the alert, the entire sector was gone. Just a crater. I survived. He finally looked back at her. So, yeah, we all lose people. We all get put in boxes. Yours is just colder than most, but it is still a box. The silence in the room stretched. Thaleria's gaze was fixed on him, her expression unreadable. She was processing, calculating, but for the first time, the calculations seemed to be emotional. You lost her, she stated. Years ago, he said. Feels like this morning. Every morning. Thaleria began, and her voice was uncertain. I have never lost anyone, because I have never had anyone to lose. The admission hung in the air, a confession more intimate than any he could have imagined. This was the crack in the ice. This was the vulnerability she kept hidden beneath a frozen ocean of duty. She crossed the room, It was not a hesitant movement. It was a decision, a final calculation made. She stopped inches from him. He could feel the heat radiating from her body. She did not kiss him. She just looked at him, her violet eyes searching his. "This," she whispered, "this is not control." "No," he said, "it is not." This time, when he kissed her, she did not fight him. She did not pin him. She met him. Her hands came up, gripping the front of his formal suit. His own hands went to her, one burying itself in her snow-white hair, scattering the intricate ice pins. Her crown, the symbol of her station, clattered to the floor. It was not the angry, desperate collision in the detention cell. This was different. It was rough. Yes, it was desperate. It was full of the conflict of two worlds colliding. But it was not a fight. It was a surrender. It was the heat she had shared with him in the shelter. But now, it was not for survival. It was for something else entirely. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, their mouths never breaking contact. He carried her from the center of the room, stumbling, their movements frantic. They were tearing at the formal, restrictive clothes, the silks and fiber weaves, a desperate, frantic attempt to shed the armor they had both been wearing. He laid her on the massive bed of white furs. The room was cold, their breath misting in the air, but their skin was on fire. This was not lovemaking. It was an exorcism. It was the rage of her engineered life, the grief of his lost one, the tension of the assassination, the shared primal fear of the grave stalker. It was every wall they had, every defense, being torn down, piece by piece. It was chaotic and honest and painful. He drove into her, and she met him with a strength that was all her own, her nails raking his back, not in anger, but in a desperate, primal need to feel something real, something not engineered, not political. It was a storm in the eye of the storm. Afterward, long afterward, the adrenaline faded. They lay tangled in the furs, the silence of the room absolute, broken only by their harsh breathing. Reed lay on his back, staring at the ice ceiling, his heart hammering. He had crossed a line. They had crossed it together. He turned his head. Thaleria was lying on her side, facing away from him, her back rigid. "Thaleria," he said, his voice rough. She did not answer. He saw her shoulders trembling. He reached out, his hand hovering, then settled on her shoulder. Her skin was hot, damp. A small sound, a single choked sob that she tried to stifle. He gently pulled her, turning her over. The Ice Princess was crying. It was not a performance. It was not a strategic move. Silent, hot tears streamed from her violet eyes, tracing paths down her pale cheeks. She looked shocked, as if her own body had betrayed her. I, she whispered, her voice breaking. "I do not know how." "Shh," he said. He did not offer words. He did not offer solutions. He did what he had not been able to do for Alara. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tightly. She resisted for a second, her body stiff with shame, and then she broke. She buried her face in his chest and cried. It was the sound of a lifetime of control, of isolation, of engineered perfection, shattering into a million pieces. She gripped his tunic, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a frozen, collapsing world. Reed just held her, his own eyes shut tight, as the first, faint, gray light of the twin suns began to creep over the horizon. He woke to a noise, not a klaxon, not an alarm, a sound of chaos, a deep, resonant thud, thud, thud that shook the very foundations of the palace. Reed was on his feet in a second, his heart lurching. Thaleria was already awake, the warrior instantly replacing the vulnerable woman. She was pulling on her black thermal undersuit, her face a mask of cold terror. "What is that?" Reed said, grabbing his own clothes. "The Royal Guard alarm," she said, her voice tight. "The signal for a compromised crown. It has not been used in 50 years. The comm unit by her bed crackled to life. A man's voice, frantic, shouting in the harsh Cytherian language. "What is he saying?" Thaleria's face went white. She looked at Reed, her violet eyes wide with dawning horror. "He is saying, the king is dead, poisoned. The antidote failed." A heavy metallic clang echoed from her outer door. Then another. They were using a battering ram. "And," she whispered, her voice trembling, "he is saying, seize the princess. She has murdered her father." "Shero," Reed breathed, "he framed you. He was always one step ahead." The door sizzled as a thermal lance began to cut through the lock. "We have to go," she said, grabbing her thermal spear from the wall. "This way," Reed yelled. He ran, not to the door, but to his data slate, which he had left by the viewport. He pulled it open. He had not just been listening. He had been digging. "Your father and Jarro were not the only ones with plans," he said, running to a massive carved panel on the wall, a tapestry of ice depicting an ancient battle. "I have been in your palace systems for 2 days. I found the old schematics." "What are you doing?" she yelled, as the door behind them began to buckle. "Using some old resistance maps," he said. He hit a specific point on the ice carving, a low, grinding sound, and the entire wall panel slid open, revealing a dark, dripping hole. "The old aqueducts. They run under the entire city. They have not been used since the last rebellion." "Go!" They plunged into the darkness just as the chamber doors exploded inward, flooding the room with armored guards. The tunnels were a nightmare. They were not the clean, sterile ice of the palace. They were ancient, carved stone, slick with a black, half-frozen algae. The air was thick with the smell of decay and minerals. A shallow, fast-moving stream of black water rushed at their feet. Reed led the way, his multi-tool's small light cutting a weak beam in the oppressive dark. "How far?" Thaleria asked, her voice echoing. "Miles," Reed said. "These tunnels spiderweb under the old city. They were a way to move troops. They ran. Behind them, they heard the shouts of the soldiers. And then a new sound, a high-pitched mechanical whirring. "Drones!" Thaleria hissed, a small metallic sphere, bristling with sensors and a single pulse emitter, zipped past them in the darkness, its red optical light washing over them. "Down!" Reed shouted, tackling her into a shallow alcove as the drone opened fire. Pulse bolts seared the stone where they had been standing. Thaleria rose to one knee, her face a mask of cold fury. She lifted her thermal spear, tracked the drone's erratic flight path, and fired. The thump of the spear was followed by a sharp, metallic crack. The drone exploded, showering the tunnel in sparks. "More are coming," she said, her voice grim. "They are flooding the network." They ran, splashing through the freezing water, the sound of their pursuers echoing all around them. They reached a junction, a wider cavern where 3 tunnels met. Reed paused, checking his data slate, his breath pluming. He leaned against the wall, trying to get his bearings. The reality of their situation crashing down on him. He was a fugitive, allied with a framed princess in a planetary civil war. He looked at Thaleria. She was not crying. She was not the vulnerable woman from the night before. She was checking the charge on her spear, her eyes cold, calculating, every inch the warrior. "You knew," Reed said, his voice flat. She froze. "Knew what? That Jarro was a traitor?" "No." He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You knew this was going to happen. Not the details. But this, the coup, the chaos. You knew the gala was the target. She would not meet his eyes. You knew, he pressed, his voice rising, echoing in the tunnel. That whole performance, the vulnerability, our night. Was that part of the plan? Were you just securing your asset? Making sure your engineer would get you out? Was I just your escape route? The accusation hung between them, colder and sharper than the ice above. Thaleria finally looked up, and her face, illuminated by the faint light of his data slate, was shattered. The warrior was gone. The princess was gone. It was just her. I knew, she confessed, her voice a ragged whisper, lost in the sound of dripping water. I knew Gero was planning something. I was supposed to be the bait. The bait? My father and I, she said, a tear escaping, freezing on her cheek. We planned it. We knew Gero was arrogant. We let him think he was winning. Let him plot. We were going to catch him in the act. Her voice broke. He was supposed to poison the wine. We had an antidote ready. We were going to expose him. But he killed him, Reed said, the horror dawning. He beat you to it. He did not just kill him, she whispered. He knew. He must have known I was playing him. He outmaneuvered me. He framed me. Reed stared at her, the woman he had held, the woman who had cried in his arms. And me? Where did I fit into your plan? Thaleria met his gaze, her own full of a raw, terrible honesty. You were a variable, she said. An asset, an engineer who could track his comms, a tool. I was using you. She took a step closer, her hand reaching out, but not touching him. But I never expected to care if you died. Reed's last look at Thaleria in that dripping tunnel, her face streaked with grime, her eyes raw with a confession that had cost her everything, was seared into his memory. Her words, I never expected to care if you died, hung in the air, a bond stronger than any promise. It was the truth, and it was all that mattered. The drones were closing in. He grabbed her hand. He's lost, Reed said, his voice hard. You beat him. You're alive. He killed my father, she whispered, her voice hollow. Then we make him pay for it. He pulled her into the rushing water. They half ran, half waited for another hour, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter, replaced by the roar of an underground river. The aqueduct finally emptied into a vast natural ice cave, the air shockingly, painfully fresh. They stumbled out onto a windswept ledge, high in the mountains that ringed the capital city. The twin suns were a weak, gray smear on the horizon. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the world scoured and still. They were miles from the city, dressed in ruined undersuits, with one thermal spear and a data slate. Where now, engineer? Thaleria asked. Her voice was flat, empty of emotion. The shock was setting in. Reed was already moving, scanning the horizon. You said the resistance used to be active in this sector. I know the old maps. There's a fortress, an old listening post, in these mountains. It's a 6-hour walk, if we're lucky. Lucky, she scoffed. We're fugitives, hunted for regicide. Luck is a fantasy. Hope is a strategy, Reed countered, pulling her along. Now, come on. We freeze if we stop. The walk was a frozen hell, worse than his night in the expanse. They were exposed, exhausted, and running on fumes. Reed's engineering mind took over, a simple, brutal calculus, one foot in front of the other. He watched Thaleria. She was a machine. She did not complain. She did not slow. Her face was a mask of ice, her violet eyes fixed on the horizon, but her movements were stiff, her immense strength finally failing. He kept them moving, sharing the last of a protein wafer he'd salvaged from his suit, forcing her to huddle with him behind rock formations to steal a minute's rest. A poor imitation of the heat-sharing that had first bound them. The fortress was built into the mountainside, almost invisible. It was not a castle, it was a scar. A concrete and metal bunker from a war that Cytherean had tried to forget. Reed found the access panel, hidden beneath a drift of snow. He bypassed the ancient lock with his multi-tool, the door grinding open on protesting hinges. The air inside was stale, cold, and dead, but it was out of the wind. Reed found a generator panel and, using his tool, managed to reroute the last dregs of its power. A few weak, yellow lights flickered on, illuminating a command center that looked like a museum of a lost cause. Old consoles, thick with dust, sat silent. "We're safe here," Reed said, his voice echoing in the concrete tomb. "For now." Thaleria slid down the wall, her thermal spear clattering to the ground. She put her face in her hands, her body finally, violently, shaking. Reed let her. He gave her a minute, then 2. He found a supply locker. It was mostly empty, but he found 2 foil-wrapped thermal blankets and a medical kit. He draped one of the blankets over her shoulders. She did not look up. "I need to make a call," he said. He went to the main console, plugging his data slate into a port that was 3 generations out of date. He was not just a scavenger. He was resistance adjacent. He knew the old back channels, the ghost frequencies. He sent a single encrypted burst, a code, his old call sign, and the coordinates of the fortress. Then they waited. 2 hours later, a new sound. A ship, not a military patrol, but a small, dented, ugly transport that landed heavily on the fortress's landing pad. Reed went to the door. Thaleria was on her feet, spear in hand, her face wiped clean of tears. The warrior back in place. The door opened. The woman who stepped in was not Cytherean. She was human, or near enough. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and her face was a roadmap of a hard life. A long, puckered scar ran from her left temple, across the bridge of her nose, and disappeared into her collar. She wore mismatched armor and carried a pulse rifle that had seen better decades. "Reed Vance," she said, her voice like gravel. She looked him up and down. "You look like shit." "You too. Micah." Reed smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "Thanks for coming." Micah's gaze shifted past him, landing on Thaleria. Her eyes, one gray, one a milky white from the scar, narrowed. Her smile vanished. Her rifle came up, not quite pointing, but ready. "What?" Micah growled. "Is this—" "This is Princess Thaleria," Reed said, stepping slightly to the side. She's the problem," Micah snapped. "I got your signal. Reed, I heard the chatter. The king's dead. The princess is the prime suspect. And I find you with her. You've lost your mind. Have you been playing pet for so long you forgot who they are?" "Micah, it's not like that," Reed said, his hands up. "She was framed. We're on the same side." "Same side?" Micah laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Reed, look at her. She is one of them. The royal bloodline. The cold bitch with noble blood who's been bleeding this planet dry for 5 generations. She is the reason we're all living in glorified holes in the ice, trading scraps, while she's in a palace." "That's not true," Thaleria said, her voice low, dangerous. She stepped forward, her hand gripping her spear. "You know nothing about me." "I know you're a symbol," Micah snarled. She raised her rifle, pointing it directly at Thaleria's chest. "And I'm real tired of symbols. I'm tempted to shoot you right here. Princess. And just tell the resistance I put down a rabid animal. It would make me a hero." "Micah, no!" Reed shouted. He stepped directly between them. He was unarmed, standing in front of a woman with a thermal spear, facing a woman with a pulse rifle. "Put it down." "Micah," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "Get out of the way. Reed. She's got you twisted." "No," he said. "You're wrong. She's not a symbol. She's a person. And she's the one who got us out. She's the one Jaro wants dead. That should be enough for you." "She's a royal," Micah spat. "It's in her blood." "No," a broken voice said from behind him. Reed turned. Thaleria had lowered her spear. She was staring at Micah, her face stripped of all its royal composure, all its warrior's fury. All that was left was the raw, painful vulnerability he had seen in her chambers. "It's not in my blood," Thaleria said, her voice cracking. Reed looked at her, confused. Micah just scowled. "What? What did you say?" Reed asked gently. "She called me cold bitch with noble blood," Thaleria whispered, a hysterical, half-mad laugh escaping her lips. She thinks I'm one of them. She thinks I'm pure." "What are you talking about?" Micah demanded, lowering her rifle, confused by the sudden shift. Thaleria looked at Reed, her violet eyes swimming with a truth he had never suspected. "You asked me why I was different, Reed, in the shelter. You said I was warm. Cytherians are warm. But not that warm." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "My father, the king, he was a master of control. He wanted an heir who was perfect, stronger, faster. But my mother, she was not Cytherian." Micah's eyes went wide. "What?" "She was from Elara Prime," Thaleria said, the words spilling out. "A lifetime of secrets. A conquered planet. A diplomatic prisoner. She was a spoil of war. My father. He admired her strength. Her people ran at a higher core temperature. He thought that, combined with his blood, would create a perfect heir. An heir who could not just survive Cytherian, but master it. He engineered me from two bloodlines he thought he could control." She laughed, a terrible, broken sound. "But it was a failure. I was a hybrid, a contamination. I had my mother's warmth. Her emotion. I could not control it. I was not the perfect cold air. I was a disappointment. My father kept my secret. He locked my mother away in the diplomatic suites until she died. And he raised me to be the cold bitch you see. To hide the fire he hated. To be the pawn he needed." She was weeping now, the silent, awful tears he had seen before. "I am not noble blood. I am a mistake. I am a pawn in a bloodline I never chose, and I hate it. I hate all of it." She collapsed, her legs giving out. Reed caught her, pulling her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed, her face buried in his chest. He looked over her shoulder at Micah. The scarred resistance fighter looked pale, shaken. She slowly, deliberately, lowered her rifle and activated the safety. She said nothing. She just watched the scene, her hard-bitten expression unreadable. Finally, she just shook her head, turned, and walked back to the command center. "Get her warm," Micah said, her voice rough. "Then we talk. I'll see if I can find us some real food." That night, the fortress was quiet. Micah had given them her quarters, a small, cold room with a single cot. She had managed to find a chemical heater, and it cast a weak, orange glow, fighting a losing battle against the cold. Reed and Thaleria sat on the floor, wrapped in the thermal blankets, sharing a hot, synthesized protein broth that Micah had provided. For a long time, they did not speak. Thaleria was leaning against his shoulder, her energy spent. She was not the princess. She was not the warrior. She was just Thaleria. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. For what? Catching you? For not seeing me as a symbol. For stepping in front of the gun. I told you, he said, his voice low. I'm an engineer, I fix things. You were broken. I am broken. No, he said, turning to face her. He put his hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing away the grime. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You're just the first one to ever see it. She looked at him, her violet eyes clear, all the secrets gone. She leaned in, and this time, there was no anger, no desperation, no conflict. It was soft. It was a kiss of shared pain, of profound reverence. It was the first truly honest moment of her life. They embraced, not a prelude to passion, but a need for comfort. It was two survivors, two broken pieces, fitting together, holding each other against the cold and the dark. Later, they joined Micah in the command center. The data from Reed's slate was now displayed on the main console, a complex web of names, shipping manifests, and coded messages. She's right, Micah said, pointing at Thaleria, a new, grudging respect in her voice. The princess here was right. Jarrow is the one. And I know these names. She tapped the screen. These are his co-conspirators, outer lords, mercenary captains. He's been promising them the planet, promising to break the blockade and open Cytherian to the highest bidder. So we give this to the people, Thaleria said, her voice finding its strength. To the guards, to the other lords. And how do we do that? Micah scoffed. We're in a tomb. You're the most wanted woman on the planet. Jarrow controls the planetary network. He's broadcasting your image every hour. The traitor princess. No one can hear us. They can, Reed said. He was leaning over the console, his engineer's mind racing. Jarrow controls the local network, but he doesn't control everything. The old Royal Broadcast Tower, it's on a separate system, an emergency protocol, to bypass the network in case of invasion. If we can get to that tower, we can broadcast this, he tapped his data slate, to every console, every ship, every outpost on the planet. We can show them the truth. The tower, Thaleria said, a dangerous light coming into her eyes. It's in the tundra, north of the city, heavily guarded. Then we won't go in the front door, Reed said. Micah sighed. It's a suicide mission. 2 people against Jarrow's entire guard. 3, Thaleria said, looking at Micah. No, Micah said, my place is here. I can get this data to the resistance cells. We can create a diversion, a big one, at the city's south gate. It might pull some of Harrow's guards away from the tower. But you two, you'll be on your own. A silence settled over the group. The plan was insane. It was desperate. It was the only one they had. Thaleria looked at Reed, a faint ghost of her old cruel smile playing on her lips. So, engineer, you still want to test that survival claim? Reed felt a genuine smirk, his first in days. He looked at the woman who was born of 2 worlds, who had saved his life, and who he had held as she fell apart. Let's test it together, he said. Micah's transport was too slow, too conspicuous, but her hangar had something else, an old 2-man air sled built for speed and low-altitude surveying. It was fast, quiet, and barely armored. It's a death trap, Reed said, powering it on. It's all we have, Thaleria replied, climbing in behind him, her thermal spear strapped to her back. They left the fortress, flying low, using the mountain peaks as cover, heading north into the storm-covered tundra. The plan was to skirt the city, approaching the tower from the uninhabited wastes. But Jarrow was not a fool. They were an hour out when the sky lit up. 3 sleek, black military flyers, mercenary ships, closing fast. Pursuers! Thaleria yelled over the scream of the wind. I see them! Reed shouted. He pushed the sled into a dive, dropping into a deep, jagged canyon, the ice walls a blur of blue and white. The night ride was treacherous. He flew the sled like a madman, his engineer's mind one step ahead of the physics, using the terrain, his knowledge of the old maps, to his advantage. The mercenary ships were faster, but he was smarter. A blast from a pulse cannon seared the ice just behind their engine. They're locking on, Thaleria screamed. I'm trying. He saw it too late. A narrow ravine, a dead end. He tried to pull up, to bleed speed, but the sled was too fast. He hit a sheer wall of ice, the impact a teeth-rattling crunch. The sled spun, throwing them. Reed hit the snowdrift hard. Pain, bright and blinding, exploded in his left leg. He heard a sickening snap. He cried out, a sharp, involuntary gasp. The world went white, not from the snow, but from the pain. He looked down. His leg was wrong. A piece of the sled's shrapnel was embedded in his thigh, and the angle of his shin was impossible. Reed! Thaleria was at his side. She had been thrown clear. She was bruised, but whole. I'm good, he gasped, but the words were a lie. Black spots danced in his vision. You're injured, she said, her voice frantic. The mercenary ships were roaring overhead. They were landing on the canyon rim, deploying troops. Go, Reed said, grabbing the front of her suit. Take the slate. Get to the tower. Go! I am not leaving you, she yelled, her voice a furious roar. You have to. The mission. To hell with the mission, she screamed. She grabbed him, pulling his arm over her shoulders. She tried to lift him. He was a dead weight. Damn you, human, help me, he tried. He pushed with his good leg. The pain was a wave, pulling him under. A blizzard was kicking up, the wind howling, masking their position, but also sealing their doom. Thaleria, leave me. I'm just slowing you down. You survived my world, she panted, dragging him, one agonizing step at a time, through the deepening snow, into the howling wind. You do not get to die, now. She was impossibly strong. She was carrying him, dragging him, fueled by a rage and a terror he had never seen. The cold was a physical, pressing weight. She found it. A dark opening in the ravine wall, a thermal cave, the air warmer, steam rising from its mouth. She hauled him inside, collapsing with him onto the warm, volcanic stone. The sound of the wind was a dull roar outside. They were safe. For a moment, Reed was fading. His body finally was giving up. The blood loss, the shock, the cold. Thaleria was tearing at his suit, her hands, for the first time, clumsy, shaking. She was trying to get to the wound. It's just like the first night, he whispered, his voice slurring. You cutting me out of my suit. Stop talking, she ordered, her voice trembling as she packed snow into the wound to slow the bleeding. You were right, he murmured, his eyelids heavy. I wouldn't have survived a night. He was losing consciousness. He felt her hands on his face, trying to keep him there. He felt her breath, warm, on his cheek. He faded. Her voice the last thing he heard, a desperate, broken whisper that was not meant for him, but for the dark. You survived every night I threw at you. Maybe. Maybe I just didn't want to be alone in the dark. The first thing Reed registered was the pain. It was a white-hot, screaming fire in his leg, a nova of agony that pulled him from the dark. The second thing he registered was the silence, the howling blizzard, the roar of the mercenary ships, all gone. He was not in the thermal cave. He was lying in the snow just outside its mouth, wrapped in his own thermal blanket. His leg had been treated. The shrapnel was gone. The wound was crudely but effectively cauterized. sealed with a high-temperature medical resin from her kit. A heavy-dose stim pack was jammed into the snow beside his hand, its needle empty. She had saved his life, and she was gone. He sat up, his vision swimming. "Thaleria?" His voice was a dry croak. The cave was empty. Her thermal spear was gone. His data slate was sitting on his chest, its screen dark. He picked it up, and a small metallic object fell into his lap. It was a pin from her hair, the one shaped like an obsidian shard. He understood. He crawled to the mouth of the cave. The snow was a pristine, damning testament. He saw the deep grooves where she had dragged him from the crash site to the cave. He saw her lighter footprints leading away, and he saw the heavy mechanical tracks of the pursuers, converging on her lone trail. She had stayed with him, fixed him, and then, when the pursuit was too close, she had left. She had gone out into the storm, a single warrior on foot, to draw them away from him. You glorious, stupid, idiot," he whispered. A new feeling burned through the fog of pain and the daze of the stim. It was not anger, not at her. It was a cold, pure engineer's rage. It was a problem to be solved, a system that was broken. She had sacrificed herself. He would not let that equation stand. He jammed his leg into the snow, gritting his teeth as the pain spiked, and forced himself to stand. He was an engineer. He had implants from his resistance days. He touched a pressure point behind his ear, and the world shifted. His left eye's display flickered to life, a faint blue overlay, scanner mode. He scanned the horizon. He saw the faint, fading heat signature of her footprints, and he saw the active, blazing signatures of the mercenary patrol. Miles away, converging on a single point in a frozen valley. They had her. He looked at his leg. He could not walk. But he did not have to. He limped back to the ravine where the air sled had crashed. It was a wreck, a twisted sculpture of metal and ice. But the engine core was still intact, its power cell humming. He was an engineer. This was what he did. He fixed what was broken. He worked with a frantic, desperate precision. He did not have time for repairs. He needed a bypass. He ripped out the damaged stabilizers, jury-rigged the steering with a direct line connection, and bypassed every single safety protocol. The sled would be a flying coffin, a one-shot, barely controlled missile. He did not care. He climbed in, his hands slick with coolant and his own blood. He powered it on. The engine screamed, a high-pitched, protesting shriek. "I am not leaving you," he snarled to the empty cockpit. "You do not get to do that." He punched the throttle, and the broken sled shot out of the ravine, leaving a trail of sparks and black smoke against the white snow. He flew with a singular, suicidal focus, his scanner implant guiding him. The mercenary ship was not hard to find. It was a heavy, black, angular transport, hovering 100 feet above the floor of the valley. It was not Jarrow's personal cruiser. It was a brutal, ugly, military-grade ship. Its side bay was open, a wide platform extended into the freezing air, and on that platform, he saw her. Thaleria was in chains, heavy, magnetic shackles binding her wrists and ankles to a central stanchion. She was on her knees, her head bowed, her white hair matted with grime. Lord Jarrow stood before her. He was in full aristocratic armor, his pale blue eyes alight with triumph. He was not alone. Guards flanked him, and a broadcast drone hovered near his shoulder, its red light on. He was filming. He was preparing to execute her as a traitor, a live feed for his co-conspirators. "And so," Jarrow's voice boomed, his words meant for his private audience, "ends the failed bloodline of Theron. The traitor princess, who murdered her own father, now meets the ice." He raised a long, ceremonial Cytherean blade. "Like hell," Reed whispered. He did not attack. He did not hail them. He aimed his dying, broken sled directly at the open transport bay. The impact was a cataclysm of tearing metal. Reed's sled smashed onto the platform, skidding, spinning, and shattering into 1,000 pieces. Reed used the momentum, unclipping his harness mid-crash, rolling, his bad leg screaming as he hit the deck. Chero and his guards were thrown into chaos, stumbling back from the sudden, violent intrusion. "What is this?" Chero roared. Reed was already up, limping, the sled's emergency pulse blaster in his hand. It was a pathetic weapon, barely capable of stunning a man. "Round 2, princess!" he yelled, firing. The blue pulse bolts were laughably weak, splashing harmlessly against the guard's armor. It was a distraction. Reed was not a soldier. He was a hacker. He ignored the guards, ignored Chero, and lunged, not for Thaleria, but for the ship's main access port on the bay wall. He slammed his data slate into the interface. "You!" Chero hissed, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "The human pet!" "Close the bay door!" Chero ordered his men. Reed's fingers were a blur on his slate. He was in. He was an engineer. He did not just break locks. He rewrote architecture. "Door controls, overridden," Reed muttered. He found the internal gravity plating. Gravity, localized, maximum. The 2 guards who were charging him suddenly slammed into the deck, pinned by 4 times the standard gravity. "He is in the system," one of Chero's men yelled. "Shoot him!" A thermal bolt seared the air past Reed's head. He ducked, his fingers flying. He needed a weapon. He found the ship's schematics. Maintenance, cargo bay defense, a high-intensity, articulated laser, used for clearing mineral dust from the engines, a jury-rigged cannon. "Targeting, online." Reed grinned, the pain making him giddy. He routed the controls to his slate. A heavy black metal pod dropped from the ceiling, a bright red targeting laser slashing across the bay. Chero looked up, his arrogance finally cracking. "Kill him! Now!" The laser fired. It was not a pulse. It was a solid, blindingly bright beam of industrial-grade heat. It lanced across the bay, melting a cargo container into slag. The guards dove for cover. Chero grabbed Thaleria, pulling her up, using her as a shield. "Stop, or she dies!" Reed's targeting laser settled on Chero's face. Thaleria, who had been kneeling, her eyes closed, looked up. Her violet eyes met Reed's. They were not filled with fear. They were filled with fire. She moved. She slammed her head backward, a brutal, vicious strike into Chero's face. He roared in pain, his nose breaking. She dropped, using her chained weight to pull him off balance. Reed fired the laser, not at Chero, but at the chains. The beam hit the stanchion, and Thaleria's magnetic shackles sparked, overloaded, and fell open. She was free. Chero scrambled back, his blade in hand. Thaleria did not hesitate. She dove for her thermal spear, which Chero had set on a nearby crate as a trophy. She rose, spear in hand, just as Chero charged. It was not a fight. It was an execution. She was a warrior princess, engineered for combat, fueled by a lifetime of rage, grief, and betrayal. He was a political brute. She disarmed him in 2 moves, her spear a blur, shattering his blade. She put the tip of the spear against his throat. The bay was silent, save for the hum of the ship and the groans of the pinned guards. "Kill me, then," Chero spat, blood dripping from his broken nose. "Show them all you are a murderer, just like your father." Thaleria's hand trembled. Reed saw the conflict, the life of a princess warring with the soul of a warrior. "No," she said, her voice a low, cold whisper. "You will live. You will live to watch your world burn." She reversed the spear and slammed the butt of it into his temple. He collapsed, unconscious. Reed let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He leaned against the bulkhead, his leg finally giving out. He slid to the floor, his data slate clattering beside him. Thaleria stood there, breathing heavily. The warrior, the savior. Then she turned to him. The look on her face was not relief. It was not gratitude. It was absolute, undiluted fury. "You!" she seethed, stalking toward him. "You came for me. You are welcome," Reed panted, trying to activate the ship's autopilot. "You were supposed to be safe. You were injured. You were my one good thing. And you flew a broken sled into a battle. What in the seven hells were you thinking?" Reed stared at her. "What was I thinking? You fixed me and you walked out into a blizzard to die. You sacrificed yourself. You do not get to do that. You do not get to make that choice for me." "It was the only choice," she screamed, her voice breaking, tears of rage and frustration streaming down her face. "It was the only logical, tactical move. You were a liability. You were hurt." "I am an engineer. I am not a liability," he roared back, slamming his fist against the bulkhead. "And I am not your thing to be protected. I am your partner." "You are a human," she cried, the words tearing from her throat, a raw, painful confession. "You are soft, and you are weak, and you bleed, and I cannot lose you." The admission hung in the air, sucking the oxygen from the bay. "You," she choked, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You are the only thing that ever made me feel real. You are the only person who ever saw me. Not the princess, not the heir, not the weapon, me. And you were stupid enough to follow me." The anger was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving only the raw, exposed, bleeding nerve of her confession. She was sobbing, the full, uncontrolled, ugly sobs of someone who had never been allowed to break. Reed looked at her, his own anger dissolving, replaced by a wave of something so powerful it stole his breath. He used the bulkhead to pull himself up, his bad leg useless. He limped, dragging himself toward her. "Thaleria," he said, his voice raw. She did not back away. She met him, her hands fisting in his torn, bloody tunic, pulling him close. The kiss was not angry. It was not the desperate, conflicting passion of the palace. It was raw. It was a kiss of pure, undiluted need. It was a confirmation of life, a desperate, shared breath in the vacuum of their lives. It was the taste of salt and metal and the ozone of the spear. They collapsed against the wall, his arms around her, her body pressed against his. "You break me," she whispered, her voice shattered, her forehead pressed against his. "You see all the parts, all the broken, engineered, awful parts." "I see you," he whispered back, his lips brushing her hair. She pulled back, just enough to look him in the eyes, her violet gaze a universe of pain and hope. "Break me, then," she said, her voice catching. "Break me, then fix me." He held her face in his hands. "We fix each other." They flew the hijacked transport to the capital. It was a fast, powerful ship, and Reed, his leg now properly set and braced with a ship's medkit, was at the helm. He had Jarrow and his guards locked in the brig. Thaleria sat in the co-pilot's chair, her face a mask of cold resolve. The data slate was plugged into the console. They were a two-person army. "Micah," Reed said into the comm, using the old resistance frequency. "We're on our way. We have Jarrow. We have his ship. And we have the broadcast." Micah's voice crackled back. "It is about time. The south gate is getting hot. I've started the party. The diversion is live. Jarrow's mercenaries are scrambling. The tower is... well, It is as clear as it is going to get. Explosions bloomed over the capital city, a brilliant, terrible light show. Micah's rebels were drawing the new regime's forces away, creating a path. Reed piloted the transport ship through the chaos, its stolen mercenary codes getting them past the automated defenses. He landed, not on the main platform, but on a high-level maintenance gantry. The tower was a needle of black ice, 1,000 feet tall, the broadcast hub for the entire planet. "Guards," Thaleria said, her spear in hand as the bay door opened. "Let me handle it," Reed said. He limped out, his data slate in hand. The two guards at the door were loyalists, not Sharrow's men. They saw the traitor princess and raised their rifles. "Halt, by order of Lord Regent Sharrow." "He is a traitor," Reed said, not even slowing. He broadcast his authority, not with his voice, but with his slate. He had Sharrow's codes. "I am here on Lord Sharrow's authority to purge the system. The princess is my prisoner. Stand down." The guards hesitated. The codes were authentic. Reed and Thaleria walked past them into the tower. The broadcast room was at the apex. It was a vast circular chamber, its walls a 360-degree view of the burning, chaotic city. A handful of technicians were at their consoles. "The Lord Regent is compromised," Thaleria announced, her voice ringing with royal authority. "I am assuming command of this broadcast." The technicians looked up, terrified. "Do it, Reed," she said. Reed limped to the central console. This was it. This was the system he was born to hack. He plugged the data slate in. "What are you doing?" the chief technician stammered. "Giving the planet an update," Reed said. He hit the key. On the massive screens that ringed the room, Lord Sharrow's face, broadcasting his new authority, vanished. It was replaced by a small windowed file, a recording. It was Sharrow's voice, coded but clear. "The crown will fall before the second moon sets. The mercenaries will secure the tower." It was Sharrow, plotting the assassination. The technicians stared, their faces pale. "And once I have the princess, I will consolidate the bloodline and offer the shipyards to our off-world partners." The broadcast was live. It was going out to every comm, every ship, every home on Cytherian 7. The doors to the broadcast room burst open. It was Sharrow's personal elite guard, the ones who had not been on the ship. They had realized the deception. "Stop that broadcast," their captain yelled. Reed did not stop. He was an engineer. He locked the system. Thaleria moved. She was not a princess. She was a storm. Her thermal spear was a blur. She was not fighting to kill. She was fighting to disable, to win. The standoff was brief, brutal, and one-sided. Thaleria, fighting for her life and her world, was a goddess of war. When it was over, she stood, breathing hard, amid the groaning, disarmed guards. She turned, not to Reed, but to the main broadcast microphone. Her hair was a mess. Her suit was torn. Blood was streaked on her cheek. She was beautiful. "My people," she said, her voice shaking but clear, carrying across the planet. "You have heard the truth. Lord Sharrow is a traitor. He murdered my father, King Theron." She paused, closing her eyes. "My father was also a traitor. He was a traitor to himself and to all of us. He built a cage of ice and called it a kingdom." She looked directly into the broadcast pickup. "He engineered me. He lied to you. My mother was not Cytherian. My noble blood is a lie, a political tool, a chain. I was raised to be your princess," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I do not want the title, the crown. It is a lie. It is poisoned." She reached up and with a single symbolic gesture, she unpinned the obsidian clasp from her shoulder. the last remaining symbol of her royalty. It clattered to the floor. I am Thaleria, just Thaleria, and I am stepping down. I denounce my lineage. I offer my title, my blood right, not to a new king, but to a people's council, to you. Governance. That is a choice. Make it. Silence. The city, which had been a roar of chaos, seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the comms, a new sound, cheering. The rebellion had found its voice. The reform had begun. The palace, the city, was falling into a new, uncertain future. Thaleria turned away from the mic, her strength finally failing. She leaned against the console, her legs trembling. Reed came to her, limping, and put his arm around her. They stood together, looking out the window at the city, at the twin suns finally, truly, rising. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I never knew a human could survive my world, she whispered, her voice tired but new. She turned her face to look at him. I never knew I'd want him to stay. Cytherian 7 was a planet waking from a nightmare. 3 weeks had passed since the broadcast. 3 weeks since the traitor princess had become the liberator. 3 weeks since Lord Jarrow, exposed and humiliated, had been placed in the same diplomatic detainment cell that Reed had once occupied, his trial pending before a new, chaotic, and volatile People's Council. The planet was in transition. The word itself was too clean, too sterile. Cytherian was in a state of primal, messy rebirth. The royalty was dissolved, a declaration Thaleria herself had signed, her hand steady, her face pale. The royal spire, that blade of black ice and oppression, was now a public building, a frantic hive of activity. Its grand halls, once silent save for the slide of silk and the whisper of courtiers, now echoed with arguments, with passionate, clumsy debates as nobles, merchants, engineers, and ice haulers tried to forge a new government. The blockade, Jarrow's primary tool of leverage, had evaporated, with his off-world mercenary contacts exposed and his internal network shattered. The ring of ships that had choked the planet for a decade simply left. They were businessmen, and the contract had been voided in the most public way imaginable. In their place, new ships had come. First came the Resistance, led by a scarred and grudgingly triumphant Micah. They came not as conquerors, but as liaisons, bringing long-overdue supplies, technology, and news from the galaxy. They were here to help the new council stabilize, and, more importantly, to formally open relations with a world that was, for the first time, free. Then came the others, freighters, medical ships, diplomatic envoys. The galaxy, it turned out, was very interested in a world with untouched mineral resources and a newly open government. Reed Vance stood at a viewport in the old fortress, the Resistance base, watching one of the new freighters, a big, ugly civilian hauler, burn its way into the atmosphere. His leg ached. The wound had healed, but the bone graft knit by the ship's autodock was still settling. It would always be a reminder. He was a hero, of a sort, the human engineer, the princess's consort, a title that made him want to vomit. He was a curiosity, a mascot of the revolution. He had been offered a permanent seat on the Council for Technological Integration. He had been offered wealth, a title of his own, anything he wanted. He wanted none of it. He was an engineer. He had spent the last 3 weeks doing what he did best, fixing things. He and Micah, in an unspoken functional partnership, had worked night and day to stabilize the planet's failing power grid. He had helped them reroute communications, bypass Jarrow's remaining digital dead traps, and get the water recyclers in the lower city functional for the first time in 5 years. He had worked. He had not allowed himself to think, because thinking meant her. He had barely seen Thaleria. She was no longer a princess. She was just Thaleria, and just Thaleria was the single most important person on the planet. She was the bridge. She was the only one the old nobility would listen to, and the only one the new, populist factions trusted. She was the one who sat in the council meetings for 18 hours a day. Her voice, once trained for command and mockery, now a tool of careful, patient negotiation. She was dismantling the cage her father had built, one icy, rusted bar at a time. He had watched her from a distance. He saw the exhaustion under her eyes. He saw the weight of 1,000,000 new responsibilities settling on her shoulders, a burden heavier than any crown. And he saw that she had no time for him. They were two heroes of a war that was already over. They had been forged in a crucible of 6 days, a lifetime of intimacy, violence, and confession compressed into a single explosive event. And now it was just awkward. The night after the broadcast, they had found themselves in her old chambers. The chaos was still raging. They were covered in grime, blood, and sweat. They had stood in the middle of the room, the silence deafening. And he, like a fool, had said, "What now?" She had looked at him, her violet eyes so tired he thought she might shatter. "Now, I go to work." And she had. Micah stumped into the room, her heavy boots clanging on the metal deck. She was holding 2 steaming mugs of a foul-smelling brown liquid that passed for coffee. "You're staring at the sky again, Vance," she said, her gravelly voice a familiar comfort. She handed him a mug. "Only people who want to leave stare at the sky." Reed took the mug, the heat a welcome sting. "Just watching the new economy arrive." "Right." Micah leaned against the console, her scarred face unusually serious. "That ship, the Stellar Path, it's one of ours. Or, ours as in a friendly charter. It's making a run back to the core worlds. Light freight, passengers, if they've got the clearance." Reed looked at her over the rim of his mug. "And I've got the clearance." It was not a question. "You do," Micah said. "No, you're the resistance hero who helped liberate a planet. You've got clearance to go anywhere you want. It leaves in 3 hours from the old municipal port." Reed was silent. He looked at the ship, now a silver speck descending toward the capital. Home. What was home? Earth was a memory. Ilara was a ghost. He had been a scavenger, a man running from a past that was nothing but a crater. "You don't belong here, Reed," Micah said, not unkindly. "You know that, right? You did the good work. You fixed the machine, but this isn't your machine, this isn't your world. And her?" The word slipped out before he could stop it. Micah's expression softened, a rare, unsettling sight. "She's not a princess anymore, Reed. But she's the mother of the Republic, or whatever the hell they're calling her. She's Cytherian's, she's not yours. She was never yours. You were just a catalyst." He nodded, the simple, logical truth of it hitting him like a physical blow. He was the engineer, the variable, the tool. He had served his purpose. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm a scavenger. Time to move on to the next haul." "Go pack your things," Micah said. "I'll make sure the transport's ready." She clapped him on the shoulder, a heavy, painful gesture of friendship, and left him alone with the cold mug and the open sky. He had to tell her. He could not just leave. He owed her that. He found her, not in the council chambers, but in the Spire's medical bay. She was sitting on a cot next to a small, pale Cytherian child, one of the many who had been poisoned by the failing water systems. Thaleria was holding a data slate, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she cross-referenced a chemical analysis of the water with a new medical supply manifest. She was wearing simple gray, functional trousers and a tunic, no silks, no armor. Her white hair was pulled back in a simple, practical tail. She looked small and impossibly tired. When she looked up and saw him, her face did something strange. For a fraction of a second, it was not the stateswoman. It was just her. Her eyes lit up, a smile, a real one, started at the corners of her mouth, and then, just as fast, it was gone. She stood, her mask of cool, polite efficiency sliding into place. "Reed, is something wrong? Is it the grid?" Micah said the southern relay was... "The grid's fine," he said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet, sterile room. He shoved his hands in his pockets. I came to say goodbye." The words just hung there. Thaleria's expression did not flicker, not a single micron. She was perfect. She was the woman who had been engineered for control. "Goodbye," she said, her voice a calm, detached query. "Micah, the Resistance. There's a ship. It's leaving for the core. Away home." She held his gaze. He was looking for something. A crack. A flicker of the woman he had held as she sobbed. He saw nothing. He saw the Ice Princess. "I see," she said. She nodded, a short, crisp, political gesture. "That is logical. Your work here is done. Engineer. You have given us a great gift, but as you said, this is not your home." It was a dismissal. It was a perfectly polite, perfectly reasonable, and perfectly soul-crushing agreement. "So," he said, feeling like a fool. "Yeah, I guess this is it." "It is," she said. She smiled. That cold, cruel, perfect smile from the first day, but this time, it was not cruel. It was just empty. "We are grateful. I am grateful. You survived. You proved me wrong on every count." "Thaleria," he started, but he did not know what to say. "Go," she said, her voice soft but final. "Be well. Reed Vance. Go home." She turned, deliberately, back to the medical console. She picked up the data slate. She was done with him. He was a fool. He had imagined... He did not know what he had imagined. A future. A partnership. He was a human. And she was Cytherian. She was the planet. She had a world to fix. She did not have time for a human pet. "Yeah," he whispered to her back. "You too." He turned and walked away, his limping footsteps echoing in the white, sterile hall. He did not see her hand, the one holding the slate, begin to tremble violently. He did not see her close her eyes, her knuckles white, as she fought for control. He did not see the single, hot, silent tear that tracked down her face and sizzled on the cold console. He just saw her back. He packed. It was easy. He had nothing. His old ruined undersuit, his multi-tool, his data slate, which he almost left. But it was a record of his time here. A clean thermal suit Micah had given him. He stuffed it all into a simple gray Resistance duffel bag. He stood in the empty concrete room. It was done. Micah was waiting at the municipal port. It was chaotic. Cytherians, in their furs and silks, were mingling with human resistance fighters and alien freighter crews. It was a new world. The shuttle, a small boxy transport, was on the tarmac. Its ramp down. It would take him to the stellar path in orbit. "This is it. Vance," Micah said. "This is it." He agreed. He looked around. A stupid, desperate, final hope. He was looking for her. Of course she was not here. She was running the planet. She had already said her goodbye. She had dismissed him. She's not coming. Reed, Micah said gently. She's busy. She's got a world to run. I know, he said, the word tasting like ash. I know. He slung the duffel over his shoulder. Keep them honest, Micah. You know I will, she grinned. Now get out of here. You smell like a human. He gave her a weak, tired smile. He turned and he limped up the ramp into the shuttle. The bay was small, sterile, and smelled of ozone. He was the only passenger. He found a seat, a hard metal bench, and strapped himself in. His leg throbbed. He was so tired. The ramp hissed, sealing him in. The lights changed from white to a dull pre-flight red. The engines began to whine, the vibration rattling his bones. Then it was over. He had won. He had survived. He was going home. He felt empty. He felt wrong. He reached into his duffel bag, pulling it onto his lap. He needed to check his slate, to do something, to not think. His fingers fumbled with the zipper. He opened the main compartment, his thermal suit, his tool, his slate, and something else. It was small, sitting right on top. It was not his. He pulled it out. It was a crystal, a smooth, palm-sized sea-green stone. It was a Cytherian thermal crystal, a high-grade one, used in their most advanced environmental suits. And it was warm. It was pulsing with a faint internal heat, a steady rhythmic warmth that seeped into his glove. He stared at it. Where had this come from? Thaleria. She must have had a servant put it in his bag. A final gift, a severance payment, a thank you for your service token. The cold, clinical nature of it made him angry. But no. He looked closer. He recognized the specific smoky inclusion in its center. It was hers. The one from her personal medkit. The one she had pressed into his hand in the blizzard cave. The one she had used to try and keep his blood moving as he faded. He must have dropped it. She had kept it. And now, she had given it back. He closed his fist around it. The warmth was a living thing. And in his mind, the dam of control, of logic, of self-preservation finally broke. Flash, the ice garden, her, a vision of cruel, cold beauty. You would not survive a single night, Flash, the gravestalker, its metal shriek. Her, on the ridge, her spear glowing, a goddess of ice. Flash, the shelter, his body, one violent dying shiver. Her skin, a furnace. Stop fighting it. Her breath on his cheek, her lips, inches away, in the dark. Flash, the detention cell, her slamming him against the wall, the fury, the heat, the raw, violent kiss. Play me harder. Flash, the gala, the wind on the balcony, her hand, his hand, over his heart. I already am. Flash, her chamber, her crown, clattering on the ice, her body, her strength, meeting his. The storm, the fight, the desperate, honest, beautiful surrender, then Flash, her, in his arms. The first sob, the first tear, the sound of a world breaking. Flash, the blizzard, her, dragging him, screaming her defiance at the wind. I am not leaving you. Flash, the transport ship, her, weeping with rage and relief. You're the only thing that ever made me feel real. And finally, her face in the medical bay, the briefest, truest smile, instantly murdered. The mask, the cold, logical dismissal. She was lying. The engines pitched. The sound of takeoff. A final screaming farewell. He was on his feet. He was an idiot, a blind, colossal, human idiot. She was not dismissing him. She was protecting him. No, she was protecting herself. She was putting on the armor, The ice, the mask she had worn her whole life. She thought he wanted to go. She thought home was a place he wanted, and he had walked away. He had agreed. "Wait!" he roared. He unclipped his harness and threw himself at the ramp, pounding on the sealed door. "Wait! Open this door! Open it!" The shuttle pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sir, we are in ascent. Return to your seat." "I am not on this ship," Reed yelled, slamming his fist against the metal. "I am not leaving. Put me down." He was a madman. He was the hero of the revolution. Maybe that's why it worked. The whine of the engines died. The shuttle, which had lifted maybe 20 feet, settled back onto the tarmac with a heavy thud. The pilot's voice was pure, professional fury. "Sir, I am getting off," Reed said. The ramp hissed, a crack of bright, cold daylight. Reed did not wait for it to open fully. He slid through the gap, dropped the last few feet, and hit the icy tarmac. He landed badly on his good leg, stumbling, but he did not fall. He ran. Micah was still there by the terminal door, her mouth open, her hand halfway to her sidearm. "Vance! What in the—" He ran right past her. He was in his light travel suit. The air was a razor, a familiar painful slice in his lungs. His leg was screaming, a white-hot stabbing fire with every step. He did not care. His breath plumed in front of his face. He was running to her. For the first time, he was not running from anything. He was not surviving. He was living. He ran through the new, chaotic streets. Cytherean stared. The human, the consort, a madman, his hair unkempt, his face a mask of desperate, joyful, painful purpose. He was laughing, a wild, breathless sound that misted in the cold. He knew where she would be, the ice garden, the place it had all started, the place he had been a prisoner, and she had been a queen. It was a public space now, but it was empty. The snow was falling, soft, fat flakes, not the razor-shard ice of the past. He found her. She was standing under a massive crystalline willow tree, its fronds heavy with new snow. She was alone. She was facing away from him, a small, solitary figure in a gray tunic, staring at the exact spot where her dais, her cold, black stone throne, had once sat. He stopped, 10 feet away. He was panting, his lungs on fire. His leg had given out. He was leaning against a frozen bench. "Thaleria," he gasped. She did not turn. He saw her shoulders tense. She was putting on the armor. He saw the ice forming. You missed your ship, engineer," she said. Her voice was flat, perfectly controlled. She was speaking to the willow tree. A logistical error." "No," he said, pushing himself off the bench. He limped toward her, each step an agony, each step a victory. I'm right on time." She still would not turn. She was afraid. He could see her hands, fisted at her sides, afraid to look, afraid to hope. He was right behind her now. He could feel the faint personal heat of her, a familiar furnace in the cold. He could smell the ozone and cold stone, the scent of her. He did not touch her shoulders. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, holding her tight. She gasped, a sharp, broken, choking sound. It was the sound of her armor, her ice, her control, shattering into a million pieces. She was trembling. "Reed," she whispered, her voice a plea. He leaned his head down, pressing his cheek against her snow-white hair. He held her, breathing her in. He closed his eyes. "You told me I wouldn't survive a night," he whispered, his voice rough. He felt her body shake, a sob she could not control. "Let's test a lifetime." She turned in his arms, her face a beautiful, wonderful, terrible wreck. Her violet eyes were swimming in tears, tears of hope, of fear, of a love so profound it was a terrifying new world. She did not say a word. She grabbed the front of his tunic, pulled his face down to hers, and she kissed him. It was not a challenge. It was not a punishment. It was not a collision, or a surrender, or a fight. It was a promise. It was the first warm day on Cytherian 7. The snow fell, gentle and soft, a benediction. And high above the ice garden, high above the new capital, the twin suns, pale and distant, seemed, for the first time, to be burning just a little bit brighter.